It's no surprise the Honda Civic is an extremely popular car. There's so many aftermarket parts for it, and it's available now in 10 generations. So the production run of the Civic has lasted from early times. The third generation was actually released in 1983. So as I grew up, the third generation was generally the Civic that everyone wanted. But every year they've brought out better and better versions. So let's look at the best mods and upgrades for your Honda Civic. I'm going to do some more specific guides because there are a few differences between the generations. So I'm going to keep this very general, looking at the general methods of tuning your Civic and upgrading it. So when people look at the Honda Civic, they're often looking at the Type R as inspiration for their project. And I really have to point out that the Type R is usually quite a different car from the base Civic. So the Honda engineers have generally reworked everything they can to create that Type R race version of the Civic. So it doesn't share very many components with the stock Civic other than its general appearance. It's certainly not impossible to source those Type R parts and fit them to your Civic. And if you've got a breakers yard near you that specializes in Honda Civics, it can often be a cheap way of doing an upgrade. But bear in mind, there's often a knock-on effect with parts. So depending on your generation, there's a few little nuances to be aware of. Got a little favor to ask. Can you just drop us a like? And please, in the comments, let us know what car you've got, what your plans are for it, what mods you've got, and what your experiences are. It really helps us to get out there. We're a very small channel, so we really appreciate the feedback from our viewers. And please, in the comments, let us know what you found to be the most optimal setup for your Civic and any mods that you've done, because that helps us to improve the articles and the information that I'm able to give out. You've got quite a big range of engines through Honda. You've got the D series, the K series. There's so many different engines they've produced, and they often can be swapped quite easily between models. We've got an article on our site that goes into Civic engine swaps. So if you want more information on what engines fit in what Civics and what the characteristics are of the engines to help you choose one for your project, please drop by. I'll put a link below so you can get easy access to it. But the VTEC engines are absolutely amazing engines. The overall Honda engines are just really well built. They seem to be experts at extracting as much power from a naturally aspirated engine as possible. They're nicely constructed, they're usually very well balanced, and they generally have a much higher red line than typical cars from European manufacturers. So it lends themselves really nicely to tuning. So we often recommend camshafts for most naturally aspirated engines, but if you've got VTEC, you've essentially got a sports cam profile already in that engine. So what you can do on most of the VTEC engines is get that VTEC mechanism to kick in slightly earlier. So you come into the VTEC zone at lower RPMs, and you would generally achieve that by using some sort of aftermarket ECU or some sort of plug-in module to address that. So Hondata is quite a popular one. Apexy do quite a range of aftermarket ECUs, and there's a lot to choose from when it comes to aftermarket ECUs. Another popular engine mod on these naturally aspirated Civics is individual throttle bodies on the intake. So changing the trumpet size on those throttle bodies can actually alter where in the RPM range you get the power, and can just allow you to really fine tune the air and fuel delivery into the engine to just balance everything up, and it allows you to extract the maximum amount of power from your project. They also look great under the engine bay, and some people actually quote better fuel economy when they fitted these aftermarket throttle bodies, but it depends a lot on how the car is tuned and set up as to whether it's providing more economy or purely for extra power. Think about your project and how far you're willing to take it before you invest in your aftermarket ECU upgrade. But for most people, the Hondata allows enough control over the ECU and the settings to just extract that little bit more power. So the heads on the engines flow pretty well. The valves are quite nicely set up, so you don't really need to start thinking about improving those on most of the blocks until you start hitting those massive power figures. So Honda have done a really good job at setting up the engine, which gives you a really nice base to work on. Now the flywheel is the big mass on the side of the engine that stores the kinetic energy, and going slightly lighter on that will allow the engine to rev more quickly. The rev increase and decrease will be much faster. The engine will feel more responsive. You'll be able to unleash that power that little bit sooner. I would argue argue that it probably doesn't add power to the engine. It will make the car a little bit lighter because you're saving a little bit of weight, but generally it just improves the characteristics and the response of the engine itself. Intake mods are popular upgrades for the Civic. Again, Honda have done a pretty good job on the stock intake, so you don't look at a restriction appearing until you've got another 20, 30, maybe even 40% more power going into the engine. So most projects seem to go with induction kits, but the induction kits often suck warm air in from the engine bay, which is not a great characteristic in a tuned car. So if you do go with an induction kit, make sure it's separated from those warm temperatures and you've got a cold air feed leading into it. And be careful where you site that cold air feed. You certainly don't want to be sucking water up into the intake. That's not going to do your engine any good at all. Fueling upgrades, uprating the fuel pressure regulator can force those injectors to deliver a little bit more fuel to the engine itself. It makes the throttle response a little more snappy and can just give you a little bit more headroom, but you may have to uprate the injectors if you've made substantial power gains to your engine. Depends how aggressive you've been with the ECU tuning and that aftermarket ECU. So another thing that often happens on these Honda Civic engines, particularly the K series, is turbo upgrades. There's quite a few kits around where people have got all of the ancillary components, they've worked out the mapping, the timing, they've got an intercooler, and all the pipework is just designed for the Honda Civic engine itself. And they've become relatively easy to bolt on. Now I say easy, adding a turbo is never an easy project, but it will add substantial amounts more power to your project. So in some cases you might be able to double the power that your engine actually releases. So we've got more articles coming on Honda specific engines and how far you can take them and specific tips. So please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Really appreciate you watching the video and following us, and please drop us a like. Don't forget to stay tuned and I'll see you in the next video.